I think we're confronted with a major international situation. If you go back to the fall of the Berlin Wall, it was widely said that we went into a holiday with history. We had a couple of conflicts related to terrorism in Afghanistan and in Iraq, but no big power competition. Fast forward to today, we still have the terrorist threat challenge, which the Israelis are trying to deal with. And we have big power competition from China, Russia. So in many ways, the world is more endangered today than it has been in my lifetime. So the question is America going to lead? I think the Biden administration sent the wrong signal when they had the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. I think that was like giving a green light to Putin to go into Ukraine. And we see that Iran, the principal sponsor of terrorism, sending drones to the Russians and attacking Hezbollah, in this particular situation, Hamas, attacking the Israelis with drones. So it's all connected. You can't separate out one part of it and say, oh, we're only going to deal with this. It's all connected.
So the White House is now coming forward with a $105 billion request, and they are linking all these things: Israel, Ukraine, Taiwan, the southern border. A number of your GOP colleagues object to that, but let's start with Senator Rand Paul. He says this:
our deficit this year will exceed $1.5 trillion. Borrowing money from China to send it to Ukraine makes no sense.
So what is your answer to that, this idea of taking money from somebody who doesn't wish us the best in all circumstances in order to pay for Ukraine?
Well, he's certainly right that the deficit is entirely too big, and it frankly was expanded during the previous administration as well. So I think neither side has done a very good job of dealing with the deficit. However, you have to respond to conditions that actually exist, that are a threat to the United States. The Iranians are a threat to us as well. And so this is an emergency. It's an emergency that we step up and deal with this axis of evil: China, Russia, Iran, because it's an immediate threat to the United States. And so we'll see what the supplemental looks like. We're going to take a good hard look at it. And I and most of my members believe we need something credible on the border as well. I mean, if we're going to challenge, accept the financial responsibility of helping our allies, we certainly want to do something to help ourselves. And so we'll give this supplemental request a serious look, probably recommend some changes as well.
Well, some critics say they don't want everything bundled because they do think that those are separate crises. Josh Hawley, Rick Scott both say they don't support that idea. Here's something that came from Senator J.D. Vance after the president's remarks. He said this:
I think what the president did is completely disgraceful. If he wants to sell the American people on $60 billion more to Ukraine, he shouldn't use dead Israeli children to do it. It was disgusting.
Now, Senator Vance told me he thinks the president should have to come and make the argument on each of these separate priorities, and no one, especially not Republicans, should be giving him cover on something like explaining to us what the goals are in Ukraine and how long that's going to last.
Well, there are some differences of opinion among Republican senators about this. I don't view it's about whether to give Biden credit or not. This is a question of whether it's a serious threat to the United States. If the Russians aren't defeated, they'll go into a NATO country next. And the notion that somehow our Asian allies are unconcerned about Ukraine is completely wrong. The Prime Minister of Japan said, if you want to send President Xi a message, beat the Russians in Ukraine. The South Koreans, the Japanese, Taiwanese are all interested in what's happening over in Ukraine because they know President Xi is watching that. President Xi recently declared that they had an endless friendship with the Russians. what more do you need to know about how relevant Ukraine is to Asia and to the Middle East?
So Putin is over there this week in Beijing, been meeting with Xi. How worried are you about them looking from the outside and watching things like Axios reporting that artillery shells that we had designated for Ukraine are now having to be diverted to Israel? Taiwan has millions of dollars worth of orders for equipment and artillery that we've been unable to fulfill for them. What do you make of what China must be thinking watching all of that?
Yeah, one of the best things about this from a U.S. point of view is when we give older equipment to the Ukrainians, for example, we are rebuilding our industrial base in this country. There are jobs being created by the help that we're providing Ukraine in 38 different states, and rebuilding our industrial complex for the more serious big power threat in Asia. So the notion that our assistance for Ukraine is not helpful to us is simply not factual. We need to get more serious about Iran. This administration flirted with Iran on the nuclear deal again. Senator Cotton and I've joined him have a bill to freeze the $6 billion that was supposed to be sent to the Iranians related to the hostage release. They shouldn't get a penny of it, and it ought to be law, not just left up to the discretion of the president. So the main point I'm trying to make here is that you can't just take out part of this. It's an overall effort by the Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians to go after the free world. And the Israelis are feeling the pinch at the moment more than anyone else, and we need to stick with them, because what's going to happen here very quickly. And by the way, the Chinese made no reference to Israeli problems. They just talked about the Hamas. We know which side they're on, and we need to view this as a worldwide problem, is my point.
Do you think, because many Americans want the government to speak as one voice where they can, the Senate, the White House, on issues of import like Iran, I mean, where we have a clearly defined position or relationship with them. Do you think this White House has been a good partner with the Senate, with Republicans, when it comes to issues of foreign policy?
Well, look, I'm generally supportive of the president's approach here and viewing this as a worldwide problem. On the domestic side, I can't think of a single thing I support the Biden administration has done. They are, for example, the creator of 40-year inflation as a result of the massive spending they engaged in the last Congress. So generally speaking, I think this has been a left-wing administration that I don't support. However, when it comes to foreign policy and defense, I like the way it used to be, where we would get together and try to do the right thing for our country and for our allies. NATO, for example, is the most successful military alliance in world history, and they are threatened by what's happening in Ukraine. Also, the argument you might have heard is that the Europeans are not doing enough. You might be interested to know they've done about $90 billion, and they are housing lots of refugees who escaped from the war. We're providing more military, but they're providing more humanitarian and taking care of people who escaped from Ukraine during this. So I think that NATO countries are by and large carrying their load, and some of these countries, these smaller countries, are spending more as a percentage of gross domestic product on helping the Ukrainians than we are.
To this point where there's sort of a collision of the foreign policy and a domestic issue here, I want to ask you about Senator Menendez. The superseding indictment now in his case says he essentially, the allegations are that he did things to benefit Egypt in exchange for things of value or promises of things of value and didn't register as a foreign agent. That's quite an allegation to make against a sitting senator. Do you think he should resign? Should due process play out in the courts? What do you make of the allegations?
Well, I think that's something Senator Schumer and the Democrats have to decide how to deal with. And I'm not going to give him advice about how to deal with it. Let me just say this. I'm glad he's not a Republican.
Well, you've got some Republican issues over on the House side. Any advice for those folks over there as they try to figure this out?
I hope they can get a speaker sometime soon, because it does send, I think, a poor message to our allies and our enemies around the world. And we also have work to do. We have appropriation bills to pass. We have a supplemental to deal with. So I'm pulling for them to finally wrap this up sometime soon.
Leader, we thank you for your time.
Thank
Good to
you.
see you.